I thank you all for being here. I'm really thrilled. I mean, I say I'm thrilled to every talk I go to, but having the chance to come out to Palo Alto and be here, I'm particularly thrilled. I realized the last time I was here was almost 20 years ago to the day. I was here on April 1st, 1994, taking a tour as a high school junior, and I totally fell for the Stanford newspaper's April Fool's Day prank. They said Natalie Merchant, who I imagine I'm dating myself, she was a popular singer in the 1990s. Natalie Merchant is coming to Stanford in the next class. And so I got, not on a cell phone, I picked up a payphone, or a hotel phone, and I called my mom, and I said, Mom, I can go to college with someone famous. To which her response was, oh, but the tour guide at Brown was so sweet. So for better or worse, I listened to my mom's advice, and I'll come back to this method of making informed decisions about where to go to college in a little bit. Most of my talk is going to be focused on several projects I've and colleagues have developed to apply behavioral insights in order to improve college outcomes for low-income students and their families. This work has been supported by numerous foundations, and really none of what I've done would be possible without them, so I want to acknowledge their support. To give you some context, if you don't do work in the college access space yourself, my work is situated within a broader and historical set of efforts to improve college outcomes for underrepresented, disadvantaged students. Historically, before I go on, please interrupt at any point. I think it'll be much more engaging for all of us if you jump in as you have questions, and don't be shy. But historically, a lot of the efforts to improve college outcomes for disadvantaged students have focused on improving academic readiness, improving college affordability. Sometimes improving affordability has meant increasing federal or state grant aid. There's also been great work led by Eric, Bridget Terry Long, and others showing that just simplifying the financial aid process and providing students with assistance can have a big impact on whether they go. More recently, there's been a lot of work focused on providing students with information and more access to advising and what role that plays in whether they go to college. Again, really pioneering work here at Stanford by Carolyn Hawksby and Sarah Turner, looking at the effect of sending students personalized information about college options on whether they, in fact, make it to a high-quality college. And once students get to campus, there are a continued number of supports available to them. So there's academic, again, work focused on, or supports focused on academic readiness. There's a continued emphasis on making sure that college is affordable. My work focuses mainly on this margin of increasing information and access to advising. And in particular, during the summer after high school, as an important but overlooked time period in students' transition from high school to college. Now, one of the reasons that information and access to help is so important, specifically in the transition to and through college, is that students and their families encounter complex information, complicated processes throughout their post-secondary trajectories. So that starts when students begin the process of exploring college. This is a screenshot from the Department of Education's main college search engine, the College Navigator. And this is for one school. I took off the name. But you can see that just for one institution, there's a series of categories that you could learn about, everything from the tuition and fees to what varsity athletic teams that college has. When you click on each of these plus signs, it pulls up a whole array of additional information. So for any given institution, there are literally hundreds of data points that students would encounter in learning about that, let alone comparing across institutions. So the very process of searching for a well-matched college is complex. Once students have applied and hopefully gotten into college, they have to go through the process of applying for financial aid, which again, work by Eric, Bridget, Terry Long, and others has shown is a very complex process that may deter students who are ready for college and potentially stand to do well from actually matriculating. And then even once students are on campus, it's not exactly a cakewalk to make it through, just from an informational perspective. This is a very, very short abstract from one course catalog. When students get to campus, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of courses to choose from. If students are at a community college or a less or even moderately selective institution, they may have only limited access to advising, a 15-minute meeting in some cases to make choices about courses. And even more complicated is the process of figuring out not just what courses to take this semester, but how to put together a path of courses that will lead towards a degree in an efficient amount of time. So there's complexity and complicated process throughout the post-secondary trajectory. And there are various indicators that students struggle in the face of this complexity. So 2 out of every 5 students doesn't apply to or attend the qualitative institution, measured, for instance, by graduation rates, that they have the academic credentials to get into. 1 out of every 5 students, and I'll come back to this research in a bit, who has been accepted to college, applied for financial aid, chosen where to enroll as of high school graduation, doesn't in fact matriculate anywhere in the year following high school. And 3 out of 5 students who come into college with an intention to pursue STEM majors don't in fact persist in those fields. Half of those students switch to another field, half leave college entirely. Sean?
Slightly tangential question, but how do people define academic mismatch? I mean, how is it measured, operationally?
Sure. So one way that that some people have looked at is whether people apply to or attend a institution for which they are within 10 percentile points of the median SAT score. So we would call someone undermatched if they're, I want to make sure I get the direction of this right, if their SAT score was high above the median for that institution.
But don't some people have to be high above the median? I mean, unless we sort strictly on SAT scores, in which case everyone at this college has exactly the same SAT score and everyone at that one has 10 points higher. I mean, there's going to be a distribution because of all sorts of other things. So the fact that some part of the distribution is above the middle seems to me an almost necessary feature of the process. So to call that a problem, I'm not saying there's not academic mismatch, but I worry about the operationalization of it and the measurement of how
Sure,
much.
and I think it's a fair point. That is one method that authors have used. Another method is to predict the probability of enrolling at a selected institution based on a range of characteristics broader than SAT. So the academic mismatch literature is, I've done less work on kind of the operationalization of mismatch, but I think it's one indication of several that students may struggle to find institutions that they have a good chance of getting into based on their abilities and where they may have a higher probability of graduating. Please.
But isn't it, I mean, it seems like the undermatching is the correlate that goes along with the undermatching that's worrisome, right? It's that SES is correlated with the undermatch.
Sure. No, that's a good point, and that I think you see more pronounced rates of students mismatching, let's say, to use a slightly less value-laden term, when they are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So that's a nice point. So in thinking about how to help students with these complicated decisions, I think it's useful to step back and consider for a minute what are some common responses that people have in the face of complexity or complex information. So one common response, and a lot of this comes from the behavioral but also the psychological literature, one common response is to procrastinate. This is something that adolescents, given their stage of cognitive development, are particularly prone to doing. But it's something that we as adults do also when faced with onerous or complex tasks. I imagine, I won't ask you to raise your hands, I may not be the only person in the room who is still yet to file my taxes because it's kind of a bothersome, time-intensive process that I would rather put off in favor of more pleasurable pursuits. So one common response is to procrastinate. Another is to stick with the status quo and to take what we could think of as a path of least resistance. In the context of college going, the default may be to stay at a nearby college because that's what one sees their peers doing. It allows one to live close to home, rather than to go through the more intensive process of finding a college that's really well matched and potentially living away from home. Another common response is to use simplifying strategies to make decisions. And I think this comes up a lot in the college search process. When faced with the prospect, as I showed you on the college search tool, of evaluating colleges on many different dimensions, many of which are not immediately accessible to students. Graduation rates, instructional dollars spent per child, net price. It's not surprising that people sometimes revert to more tactile elements of an institution in making a decision. For me, it was Natalie Merchant potentially coming here. For my mom, it was a tour guide at Brown. For a lot of students, it's a dorm room. When students talk about the factors that influence where they apply, it's often these more tactile factors that may not bear directly on the quality of institution. This, by the way, is an actual dorm room, which looked nothing like my dorm room when I went to college. And finally, a common response is to follow the crowd. When I was a freshman advisor at Harvard, this is what I saw a lot. Like students here, these are really accomplished, really smart students who you would think would kind of make very informed, deliberative decisions about what courses to take. What I experienced, and I think happens quite often, is that students don't know what courses are right for them, what they're interested in, what will lead to a pathway. And so often, students are influenced by things like what their friends do, or what they hear is a good course, or a course has a high evaluation rating among students. This is a course called The Science of Cooking. It just went viral. It was one of these classes that was taught by really popular professors, and lots of people enrolled in it, not because they were interested in science or cooking, but because they heard that their friends were enrolling in it. The reason I think that it's helpful to walk through some of these common responses in the face of complexity is it also informs how we might reach out to students and their families and support them in these complicated decisions. And there's been a lot of work in this area, not just in education, but across different public policy realms. A lot of different interventions that leverage behavioral principles to support people in their decision making. So one approach has been just to simplify information and proactively bring it to students and their families. And that's been shown, not in the case of students, but in the case of employees, to increase participation in retirement programs, to improve school choice outcomes, either at the elementary or middle school margin, also where people go to college. Another approach has just been to reduce the hassle that people need to go through in completing important elements of applying for school, applying for college. I think a great example of this is Eric and Bridget's work with FAFSA completion, where they took advantage of the fact that adults were coming into H&R Block anyways to complete their taxes. So it was a behavior that they were already taking. Eric and Bridget and their team were able to add 8 minutes of time to complete the FAFSA in addition to their taxes, and that led to big increases in successful FAFSA completion and college going. There's also work shifting people's perceptions around what the social norm is around a given activity. And so providing people with information about the share of people that comply with taxes, with their tax payments, providing people with information about what their neighbors use in terms of home energy, influences the decisions people make. And finally, where my work is going to build the most, is that sending people individualized prompts leads them to follow through on actions that we think may be in their best interest or that they've identified for themselves. So everything from increasing financial savings, getting a flu vaccination, using sunscreen. People benefit from prompts, reminders of tasks that they've already set up for themselves or that may be beneficial for them. My first foray into this work is in the context of the summer after high school, which I alluded to earlier. And the problem that the work that I and my colleagues, Lindsay Page, who's now at University of Pittsburgh, and others have done, is to address this trend that students who have, by all accounts, done everything they're supposed to in high school to get to college. One, they've done well enough academically to get admitted to institutions, often and usually four-year institutions. They've applied for financial aid in most cases. They've chosen where to enroll as of the end of high school. And they've graduated high school. The problem we see is that a substantial share of those students don't matriculate anywhere in the year following high school. This gives you a sense of the magnitude. And context is going to matter here a lot, as is how we define college attending students. So if you give me a minute, I'll walk through this. In each case, these are the percentages of college attending students who did not matriculate anywhere in the year following high school. Now, how we define college intending varies a little bit from site to site. In Boston, Massachusetts, Fulton, a couple of the other sites, I think of it as a pretty strong signal of both intention and action towards going to college. In both of these places, these percentages are of students who had been accepted, had chosen where to go, had in almost all cases applied to financial aid, 80 to 85% of these students had been accepted and were planning to go to a 4-year institution. So they had gone through some fairly elaborate application process. In the Boston sample, they had even taken the step of applying for a supplementary scholarship to help pay for the cost of college. So students who are very motivated, taken a lot of actions. These are both, in both cases, predominantly low-income students. And yet, 1 out of every 5 of them doesn't enroll anywhere. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, Philly, Dallas, it's closer to 1 of 3. This 44% melt rate in Fort Worth, I would view as a real upper bound estimate of the percent of students that melt. Partly, we have slightly, these are students who are more likely to be planning to go to community colleges, so have invested less energy or taken fewer actions to get to the point of college. And we know whether they are accepted to school. We have less information about their intentions as of high school graduation. But even if we leave this out, just the fact that 1 out of 5 kids in Boston and Fulton, 1 out of 3 kids in these other cities melt is a point of attrition in the college-going pipeline that until a few years ago wasn't getting a lot of attention. And again, these are students who've made it very far. They've graduated high school, they've gotten into college, and so they potentially are well positioned to succeed. Any questions I can answer?
Megan,
Please.
to what extent is the melt a temporary phenomenon? Like these students who are choosing not to go, is it something came up, they choose to work for a year, or something they would have gone anyways? Do we know?
That's a great question. So we have done, so this descriptive study, the descriptive analysis we've done is several years old at this point, and a very good thing, and I keep meaning, or we keep meaning to do this, so maybe if I commit myself to it by writing down, it will happen, is to kind of look at enrollment patterns several years down the road and see whether there's more equal enrollment. I will come back in a minute to describe some results that makes us think that helping students through the summer after isn't just about getting them to start early. It actually makes them considerably more likely to persist and be enrolled down the road. Eric?
One thing that gets lost in our work and with H&R Block was that half of the effect that we were finding in enrollment was actually coming through students who would have enrolled in their second 2 years out, enrolling a year earlier than they have. So it's certainly worth kind of just dissecting this in terms of trying to understand how much is deferred enrollment versus immediate enrollment. And ultimately we found that, the kind of completion of schools, completion of, the total amount of school they acquired by a specific point in time was correlated with that decision to defer, and that the deferment was bad for some students. But at the same time, that's half of our effect on enrollment was coming from that.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's certainly something that we should look into more closely. Other questions? Okay. So as we think about these melt rates, I mean, the question that occurred to me when I first started working on this is, why are students melting? They've come so far. What's getting in the way? One possibility, and I'm sure this is true for some students, is that they're making an active decision to not go to college in favor of a better alternative. A better alternative might be a job that is going to pay good wages, it's going to allow them to work for a couple of years, save up money for college, so that when they go, they will face lower costs of college. But I think there are also a variety of alternative explanations. One that we encounter is students simply don't know what tasks they're supposed to complete over the summer. And that's not for lack of colleges sending information. Just about every college that we've encountered has an admitted student's website that says, well, congratulations on being accepted. Here are the 5 things that you need to do in order to matriculate. But students might not think to check whether their college has an admitted students page. Colleges also send emails or postal mail to students in April or May saying, congratulations on being accepted. Here are the things that you're going to need to do over the next 4 months. One, students, for especially an 18-year-old, something that has to be done 4 months down the road may seem more or less indefinitely into the future. They may misplace it, or students may not be checking their email as regularly as they should. Mail might get lost in the shuffle. So one possibility, an alternate possibility, is that students aren't aware of the tasks they have to complete. The delivery mechanisms or the channels through which colleges are communicating with them just aren't working. Another possibility is that students are really daunted by all the tasks they have to complete and don't know where to turn to for help. And so I wanted to talk through a minute what a student has to do over the summer. This is all after high school graduation in order to matriculate. A lot of the tasks are financial. So what we find is that a surprisingly high share of students enter the summer not having received a financial aid award letter. It's not because they didn't apply. And as I said, most of these students have applied. One, they probably applied a little later in the game, so maybe March, April. That's one thing we find, later point of application. We also find that a substantial share of our students have been flagged by the Department of Education to verify the income and asset information they provide on the FAFSA. But again, students aren't aware of it. The department or the individual colleges has sent them an email, a letter. They got it and didn't, or they either didn't get it or they didn't realize it. And we hear, in talking with a lot of college access organizations that support students over the summer, that this comes up over and over again. Students don't know that they should have received an award letter because this is an entirely new process to them. And the fact that they haven't received it hasn't raised alarm bells that they should look into things like verification. As a result of not getting their award letters and not knowing which colleges are affordable or not, students may miss out on important tasks like attending orientation. They may not apply for housing and lose the opportunity for on-campus housing. So that's one set of challenges. Students often do have to explore supplementary loan options. Either their parents applying for a federal loan through the Department of Education or private sources, and students are, I think, often confused by that. And then there are also just unanticipated fees that arise that can be really daunting to students. So they weren't anticipating having to pay $150 to attend orientation. And that's that near-term cost, even though it's swamped for most students by the potential returns of going to college. That near-term cost can be the difference between whether they enroll or not, we find in our work, because students often don't have that money just lying around.
What is that? Is that a broken pipe? I just want to make sure I understand.
It's a broken pipe. Yeah. This is part of the behavioral presentation, right? Provide visuals to operate on a different
I
level.
couldn't figure out what was coming out the sides.
Water.
Is that, oh, that's water.
It's a truncated broken pipe.
Yeah, okay.
I'll extend the pipe the next time I do it, or have a box that says pipe pointing towards it. There are also. It's not just a matter of finances, though. There are also a variety of procedural tasks that students have to complete. They need to register for orientation and placement tests. They need to complete housing applications. They need to either sign up for health insurance or waive it if they can stay in their parents' plans. And most of the students, one point I should have said earlier, is that while these students have completed many of the stages in the college application process, I would think of them as college ready, but not high achieving. So this is different than Carolyn and Sarah's work that focuses on the highest achieving SAT students who are going to college anyways. The question was, would they go to a good public or to a really good selective flagship or private institution? The vast majority of students in our sample are intending to enroll at a good local public. So in Massachusetts, University of Massachusetts at Boston, or Framingham State University. Not Harvard, not Tufts, not Boston College. There are a handful of those, but the majority of these students are planning to enroll at good publics, good private institutions. Just one moment, and I'll come to the question. And what, again, we encounter is that students might take an initial step to register for a placement test or to complete a housing application. But if they're confused and they call, they might have to leave a message and not hear back, that there's a bureaucracy at these institutions to interface with that they find very intimidating. And aren't sure how to navigate for lack of a lot of experience. Please.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you looked at parental support with, or if anyone has looked at parental support with any of those processes, and that could be a potentially important variable.
I think it's a hugely important variable. It's not something we've looked at empirically, but we often get the question, and some of you may be thinking about this, if students can't hack these summer tasks, how are they possibly going to get to college? I'm not saying that's a question you're asking, it made me think of it. How are they possibly going to be successful in college? And I think that is I think that's missing the issue in a lot of ways. I think that these tasks are complicated for adolescents across the socioeconomic spectrum. I think what the difference is that students from more affluent backgrounds have parents who are really, really involved, who help them, or even if they're applying for financial aid or dealing with loans, I think who just do it in most cases. They help them with this paperwork. I mean, there's a reason we talk about helicopter parents in the context of college. We've heard actually from a variety of counselors when we've talked We've done focus groups or interviews with the counselors who've worked with students over the summer. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. They often say they feel like they're filling in for what middle-class parents would do with their kids anyway. So it's not that they're providing any kind of high-level expertise. They're providing encouragement, they're providing prompts, they're helping students stay on task. So I think the parental role is tremendously important, but it's not one that we've looked at empirically, just for lack of access to the data. And the other thing to point out is that all of this kind of complex array of tasks occurs at a time where students typically have very little access to professional guidance or support. So they're no longer part of their high school. Their counselors typically only work a 9 or 10 month contract, so they're just not around. They've yet to engage with supports at their college because they're not yet on campus. And their parents, we find, to the extent we hear about this anecdotally, their parents are in one of two camps usually. They want to help but don't know how for lack of personal experience with the college-going process. Or students report that their parents face very real and competing pressures about them going off to school. So parents identify the student going to school as a loss of income for the family, a loss of childcare, and that's a legitimate point of tension within the family. So, and just another explanation is that students know about the tasks. They kind of understand they have to get done, but because they're onerous and because they're kind of burdensome and time-consuming, if you think back to yourself when you were 18, you had just graduated high school, a lot of us probably were more inclined to do things that were more fun with our friends than deal with these types of tasks. And so I think another thing that comes up is that students know they have to do it but put it off, and as a result may miss important deadlines. They miss out on housing, they miss out on attending orientation, not because they didn't have it in their mind that they were going to do it, but because it was easier to keep putting off in favor of something more pleasurable and more pressing. So in the face of that, over the last several years, my colleagues and I have developed a series of field-based experiments to examine whether providing students with additional support during the summer could help them overcome this complexity and get to and succeed in college. I mentioned my colleague, Lindsay Page, who's at Pitt, who's been my longtime collaborator. I also want to acknowledge the important role that Eric, Bridget, and our colleague Laura Owen at Johns Hopkins play, particularly with the text messaging work. Eric, Bridget, and Laura really opened the door both to work with districts, but also to provide funding. So a lot of what I would show you would not be possible without Eric, so thank you. So our interventions have really been of three different varieties. In one set of interventions, we've had school counselors or community-based financial aid advisors reach out to students and offer personalized help with completing financial tasks, getting through these bureaucratic hurdles, and dealing with some of the social and emotional issues that can come up around college going. You should not think of this as a 5-day-a-week, 4-week intensive summer bridge program. This is 2 to 3 hours of personalized outreach from a school counselor or community-based financial aid advisor. So these were experiments we did in 2008, 2011. In 2012, we did a peer mentor experiment where we hired college students who were thriving in college, who had graduated from the same communities, often from the same high schools as these students, and had them reach out to students and offer personalized advice, encouragement, be able to talk through what their experience had been like so students understood that it was normal to find the summer challenging, that students can move past it. What was I going to say about it? Something else about peer mentors, maybe it'll come back to me. Finally, both in summer 2012 and then this past summer, we've run a series of experiments in which we've sent students personalized text message reminders of tasks they had to complete in order to matriculate in college. This has been done over 4 years, 13 urban districts with about, I realize, 25,000 students across our experiments, which is a much larger number than I ever would have believed. I'm going to focus primarily on the text messaging work, but I'm happy throughout or at the end to come back and talk a bit more about these other experiments. So the text message intervention consisted of 10 messages that we sent out to college intending students who, in most cases, we knew where they were planning to go to school. 10 messages that reminded students about a few specific tasks they had to complete. We asked whether they completed the FAFSA or needed help doing so, whether they needed help reviewing their financial aid award letters. We made sure they were aware that colleges now disseminate a lot of information through personalized portals, my.stanford.edu or my.utaustin, And a lot of students just don't know that they should be checking these portals for important updates about financial aid and tasks they have to complete. We provided prompts about registering for orientation, completing placement tests, and then gave them information about their tuition bill. So here's an example. Can everyone see this okay? Here are two of the messages that we send. There's a couple features that I want to point out. This first one is an example of what I think of as a message about a very discrete task. That comprised about 60% of our messages. You can see it's personalized to the student, personalized to where they plan to go to school, University of Massachusetts, Boston. This message is reminding them to register for orientation. It tells them the date when they have to register for this particular college or university. It gives them a web link that allows them to complete their registration in the moment from their phone if they have a smartphone, which most of the students we work with do. And importantly, it invites them to reply back and get help from an advisor if they need it. The balance of the messages we sent were more general encouragements to complete important tasks, as well as invitations to connect with someone. So you can see this is framed as a question. Do you need help with the FAFSA? Do you have questions about your award letter? Reply back if you need to meet with a Dallas Independent School District counselor. One question you might be wondering is how much of an administrative burden was it to pull together all this information? An interesting pattern that we, and I think Eric in your work that you've observed, is that in urban districts, the vast majority of college-going students tend to go to one of a small set of institutions, 5, 10, 12 colleges. So for each of the sites in which we worked, we just went onto the admitted students' website and pulled off this information. It was about $300 of research assistant time, so $10 an hour, 30 hours of work to do this for all of our sites, for all of the colleges, and none of it is hidden or particular secret. We're just delivering it through more effective channels. You might think, and I guess when I first started the work, I wondered how impactful 160 characters of text could be, or I guess 1,600 characters across 10 messages. But in fact, I think there are various behavioral levers that text messages can influence to impact whether students follow through on their college intentions. One thing the messages can do is just reduce complexity. Rather than sending students a packet at the start of summer that lays out tasks they have to complete over the next 4 months, each message delivers a timely and consolidated burst of information that's time relevant. It's something the student has to do in the next couple of weeks. Really easy to digest. Second, the task-specific web links make it really easy to complete a task in the moment from your phone if you've got a smartphone. And that, especially in the case of adolescents, it's important because it allows them to do it in the moment before their attention is diverted elsewhere. Sending the messages might be really important just to help students not procrastinate, to give them a prompt to deal with this task in the moment, again, before they're distracted. As my social psychologist friends in the audience and in the world more broadly remind me, the simple act of sending students information about college may reinforce an identity within them that they are college material, that they can and will go on to college. And finally, these messages really minimize the barriers to students getting professional assistance. This does not require a student to pick up the phone and call a counselor they don't know, to go into a school. For 18-year-olds who again, oftentimes may be the first in their family to go to college, that may be a pretty strong relational investment, pretty high relational investment. Replying to a text message, on the other hand, is pretty easy. So we did the summer 2012 experiment, which I'll focus on mainly in 2 different sites. One of the sites was, one of our partners was UAspire. Yeah, please.
Sorry, just to go back,
Yeah.
how did you manage to get the students in touch with the advisors, if that's what they
If you give me 2 slides, I will show you that up close and personal. Yeah.
I actually have no idea about this, but like how widespread is having a smartphone?
So my sense is that from Pew data, but also from some internal cell phone industry data, at this point, even among the lowest income households, about 3/4 of students have cell phones. Of those that do, the substantial majority have smartphones. Of those who have cell phones of any kind, over 90% text on a daily basis. And 85% of students, 85% of people now have unlimited texting plans. So that still leaves out some who we're not going to reach through texting, or some who are not going to be able to use these links. It's also, if you look at this message, certainly, this kind of link, one of the ways through which these messages might operate is by enabling people to complete a task in the moment. But there, I think, are these other channels where even if someone doesn't have a smartphone, the consolidated information, the prompt, the offer of connection for help might still be powerful levers. And then this point about people having unlimited texting, I think, is really important because it means that students are unlikely to incur costs to receive the messages, and I think our evidence supports that, which I'll come back to. John?
So it seems to me, I'm wondering about the legal context, and it seems to me that part of the reason that the text works so well is because they haven't been inundated by garbage in a way that email has.
Yeah.
And so I assume part of that is legal, that there are restrictions on what exactly you can text to that.
That's right.
And can colleges get around that by, are they free to?
So and let me talk about our sites and then answer your question. Okay. So we partnered with two organizations. You Aspire is a Boston-based organization that it really provides tremendous financial aid advising to students. They have a program called the High School Advising Program. It puts financial aid advisors in every public high school in Boston, Lawrence, and Springfield, now in Miami. And I think they're up and running out here in the Bay Area. Yep. So it was kind of perfect in the sense that we were able to reach all of the seniors in those high schools, or a lot of them, but working through a really nimble organization. And our second partner was the Dallas Independent School District. Some people who aren't familiar with the Dallas context interpret independent to mean private. But Texas being Texas, they just call every district has to be independent. But this is the public school district that serves the Dallas, Texas area. Each of our partner sites collected students' cell phone numbers through a high school exit survey. So students were providing their numbers voluntarily. I think that's an important part of it, John, to your question. Just to talk a little bit about the design, we then took the sample of students who were intending to go to college at each of these sites and randomly assigned them to receive text messages or not. Where possible, where students were willing to provide their parents' numbers, we also messaged parents. We did not randomly assign whether it was just students or students and parents. So you could think of this as a kind of household intervention. We can't separate that out. In a minute, I'll talk about the share of students for whom we had both. To your question, the answer is different before October 2013 as it is since 2013. This study and all of our texting work got in under the pre-October 2013 window, where each of our partner sites went through a legal review and determined that if students voluntarily provide their numbers, that they could text students as part of their broader communication strategies with students. Following October 2013, there were updated guidelines from the FCC, making it having stricter expectations that people are providing active consent in order to receive messages. So that's not something that we had to do here, but it was something that anyone going forward, or in our current work, that we certainly have to do. Please.
Could students opt out like any point during?
Yes, and I'll talk in a minute about what the opt-out rates look like. So this gives you a sense of the samples in both sites. Across the cities that we worked with, the samples are predominantly students of color, predominantly qualifying for free or reduced lunch. You can see that not all students give us their cell numbers. In fact, in Dallas, just over half of students provide us with a cell phone number. In Massachusetts, it was closer to 3/4 of students. I interpret this to mean that the people collecting the numbers were people, these high school advisors they had worked with. So I think there was just more of a familiarity, more willingness to provide information. You can see, though, that for the kids in Dallas who provided cell phone numbers, they were pretty willing to say, well, here's my parents' number too. Massachusetts, that this was more of a structural issue. The parent numbers came from administrative data sources, and there were just less numbers in there. We had about 2,500 students who we assigned to receive the text messages. I don't show it here, but we find no differences between the treatment and control groups at baseline after randomization. In this chart, blue is the treatment group, gold, yellowish is both of them are the treatment group. Blue is the percentage of students that replied to at least one text message, and yellow is the percent that met with a school counselor. So you can see across the sites, about a third of students responded to at least one text. In Springfield, it's closer to 50% of students. But keep in mind, in Dallas, we only had numbers for 50% of kids. And so the assignment was done among all college intending students. So the effective response rate is actually considerably higher. This is the share of the entire treatment group that responded. One thing that's interesting is that you can see there's a pretty substantial drop-off between the share of students that replied versus actually met with a counselor. I don't show it here. I really should add this in. If you looked at the percentage of students who said they would like, who wrote back saying, I'd like to meet with a counselor, it would be somewhere here. And we don't have a lot of strong data to say why there wasn't more take-up of student interest. The one thing that we have heard in some focus groups with counselors and some surveys with students is that when students wrote back to a text message saying, I want to meet with a counselor, they expected a personalized response really fast. When they didn't hear back from a counselor for a few days, they were kind of miffed about it. They said, in fact, one student said, if you're going to text me and you invite me to write back, you should write back to me soon. So I think that gets at the kind of generational issue, but also how this channel can be most effectively used. And to the question about what the response, how we facilitate responses, I'm going to come to that in just one slide. I wanted to give you a sense of what some of the responses looked like. So about a third of them were just kind of nice expressions of gratitude. This was a particularly endearing one. So I felt like I had to put it up. A lot of them were okay, or thanks, or this is helpful, but nothing more than that. About a third of them were, who are you, and why are you messaging me? One thing I should say is that we were not the ostensible senders of the messages. We were really silent partners working with the sites to send out the messages. So every student received an introductory message that said, hi, this is Dr. Lopez from the Dallas Independent School District. We want to help you go to college. Stay tuned for a few texts with college info. Write back to this number for help at any time. But still, a lot of students, Sylvia Lopez is the head of counseling in Dallas. Dallas ISD has 8,000 seniors. If 100 of them knew who Sylvia Lopez was, I would be surprised. But it's the best we could do for someone within the district. And remind me to come back in a minute to how we responded to the who's this questions. Another third of them were students who expressed not only kind of appreciation for the content, but that kind of signaled in their response that the information was both helpful and that they could use additional assistance. So just to read the top, oh, hey, you couldn't text me at a better time. I was wondering if I can make an appointment with you. I need to update my financial aid with my 2011 tax returns. I don't know how. I need your help. So that was about a third of messages in this variety. And I think, again, an indication that one, students either didn't know how to do certain things, but had been thinking about a task that they had to do and just hadn't known where to turn to for help. To the question about opt-out, fewer than 4% of students or parents opted out at any point during the study. And that's been consistent. We've now done text messaging, as I said, around Summer Mill across 10 districts. I'm doing some other texting projects, and the opt-out rates are usually on the order of 5% or fewer. So there may be some students who don't find these messages particularly useful, but I don't think we have evidence across these sites that they are imposing a burden, either by clogging people's phones or by imposing costs they don't want to incur. So to this question I keep alluding to of what did it look like if a person wrote back and requested help. In summer 2012, this again is probably horribly dating me, the response portal looks something like a 1980s Atari console, if you think about kind of interesting technology that's really early in its development. So this is a screenshot of the portal. You can see that there is the content. The nice thing is the portal was set up to blur out any identifying information when it was received. But then we only had kind of these buttons we could press that would generate some automated response. And so if a person said, who's this? We could press the describe button. And the describe button would send out a text response that was the same for everyone. It would say, this is a message. This is a project from the Dallas Independent School Districts. If you want to verify this is legitimate, call this phone number. If a student said, I want to meet, it would generate, we press the meeting button, it would generate an email to a school counselor saying, John would like to meet with you, here's his phone number. problem is, John, I as the counselor might not get around to checking my email as fast as I should, call the student as fast as they should, and then the response they get is a counselor on the phone when they were expecting someone to write back to the text.
So you didn't have a button that say, yes, our counselor will be sure.
I think actually when we pressed the meeting button, it said something, I think they actually got that message. But this, when I say we, it was me pressing these buttons and sitting on my computer as thousands of responses are coming in. Most of them I would just press ignore. Ignore in the sense the student wrote back, okay, thanks, and there wasn't any clear action. But I will always remember the first night of the project as what I think of as my Mark Zuckerberg moment, because we had these messages queued up to go out. I had no idea, or we had no idea, whether anyone would respond. And I think the message went out at 8, and by 8:01 my screen was filled with responses. And then I refresh, 8:03, another screen full of responses, which was that kind of first very strong signal that maybe we're onto something in a way to reach students. This is 2012, fast forward a year. This is when our portal meets Xbox Live, or whatever people are using these days, if my gaming analogy. The pipe metaphor didn't work, so I'm switching another direction, where we now have a much more interactive portal in place. So this is the automated message that went out. I know the text is small. This just asks whether the student has a good plan in place, if they need help. The student writes back, I saw what my bill is, so is that what financial aid takes care of? When the student writes back now, it doesn't go to this kind of static, clunky portal. It goes to something that looks to the counselor like web-based email. So the counselor has an inbox. They can see what the student writes back. They can really easily respond. The counselor interface is entirely like checking and responding to email, but the student interface is entirely through text messaging. So the counselor says, do you know how much your bill is for? $3,000 and some change. The counselor writes back, that doesn't sound like your financial aid's been applied. Did you check your email? Check to see if you have any messages from your aid office. Okay, I figured out they need my transcript. Okay, that makes sense. Once they get it, they may have more paperwork. Check back and let us know if you need help. First message sent in 10:36 in the morning. 9 minutes later, this whole conversation carries out. So as we've gotten smarter about how to effectively operate this text messaging, I think designing a portal, a really dynamic portal that allows for real-time back and forth between students and counselors is really important. A challenge that remains in the summer, at least as we've done it so far, and this would be the case for school year interventions, is that students, this student is a little different. We find that most students are responding to these things at night or over the weekend when school counselors or professional staff don't want to be working. They want to be home with their families. And so we're actually exploring now a kind of first line defense approach where we would have people staffing the portal nights, weekends, who could do an initial round of back and forth and then help connect the student to a counselor in person if they needed it. Please.
What is this a counselor that's worked with the student before, or do they have some extra screen that gives them information about who the student is?
No, it's a great question. It's varied by site, and in the U Aspire sites, it tended to be a counselor. Well, actually, it sometimes was an advisor they'd worked with before, half and half. In the times where we've worked with the school districts, it's almost always not. I mean, I think there would be real advantages in doing so. The challenge is that we've really deferred to more for political reasons, deferred to the head of counseling to determine who they hire, and it just doesn't usually align. So I'm going to, in the next few slides, talk through some of the results. And I think one of the important takeaways is that this strategy works for students, some students in certain contexts, all students. So in sites where students had, sorry for this text overlay, in sites where students have little access to college advising, to college information, either during the school year or during the summer, we find pretty pronounced improvements in college going. This is for, by the way, a $7 investment per student. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So Lawrence and Springfield, where there's just a real lack of advising in the school and the community, either in the school year during the summer, it increases enrollment by 7 percentage points. Among free reduced lunch students in Dallas, that's about 80% of the sample, increases enrollment by 4 percentage points. Yeah, please.
Are all your students independent of one another? Because one worry would be that the kids who didn't receive
Meaning, so
If your friend got text.
yeah, that's a great question, and it's come up more. It's come up more broadly with the summer work we do. Are students aware that their friends are getting outreach over the summer? I don't present it here. One reason that we don't think there's a lot of evidence of that is that some students' response may be, "I'm upset I didn't get a text. I'm going to drop out." Another response would be, "I want this information. I want to talk to a counselor. I'm going to reach out." Across our experiments and sites, the take-up rates of interaction with a counselor are at 1%. So very few people, and that's not definitive evidence by any means that there's not some level of contamination. And I guess it's possible that one response could be a negative one on students, but one might think that if you found out your friend got it, you might seek out that information as well. Another interesting pattern we observe is quite large effects for students who say they plan to go to college, but they haven't chosen which one yet. And for these students, we don't know where they're going to college, so we can't personalize the messages. We can't include institution-specific dates, we can't include web links, and it still increases enrollment for those students by 7 percentage points. Yeah?
Hi, just a quick clarifying question. So, were there students who provided their phone number who did not receive text messages?
Were there students who provided their phone number? Yes, if they were in the control group.
Okay.
These are intent to treat estimates?
These are all intent to treat estimates. So this is of all students who were assigned to the get the text compared to the average college outcomes for kids assigned to the text versus not, for the subset of the sample that had not specified their college plans. So these students were getting generic reminders. You should register for orientation, or remember to register for orientation. Remember to complete your placement test. Eric, did you have a question?
No.
Okay. And sorry.
I just had a follow-up too. So
Please.
the students who didn't provide their phone number, they're just not included in this analysis here? Or are they part of the
No,
68% on each
to
side?
Eric's point, they're part of the intent to treat sample. So the randomization was done based on whether students were college intending, just timing-wise, because we didn't know. So the sequence here is important.
No, I think I'm asking a more general question.
Yep.
So you have a universe of students. Some people provide their numbers, some people don't.
Yep.
And then you divide the students who divide their number into a treatment group and a control group.
No,
No, that's what, so what?
No.
What the sequence of events was we prior to randomization administered a high school exit survey to all students,
Right.
in which we asked for cell phone numbers. The timing worked that the district couldn't turn around the district had to input the cell phone numbers by hand. It was a paper survey, and we need to do the randomization before they could get around to doing it. So everyone does the survey. After that, we randomize who is assigned to get the text and who is not. And then we find out later for whom we have cell phone numbers not. It turns out whether that the groups are balanced on whether they provide a number or not, fortunately, as well as on everything else we looked at. One of the things we do, I don't have a slide for it here, is we look at whether there's an effect. We kind of look at the analyses within the subset of students who provided cell phone numbers compared to those who didn't. And you surely would not want to find an effect of a text messaging intervention on kids for whom you didn't have numbers. And we don't. There's no effect there. Sean.
So how big is the population that you randomize as a fraction of the overall high school graduating class? Like how many kids are in this?
Great question. So in Dallas, I know this better in Dallas off the top of my head. Our experimental sample was 3,000, about half of whom we assigned to get the texts. The graduating class in Dallas is about 7,000.
So we should think of this as 7% of less than half of the high school. I'm trying to figure out, this is not 7% more kids are going to go to college under this. This is 7% of some fraction of kids.
That's right.
So, and these are also different ones, right?
So this is a further subset. So this is
Right.
of the 3,000, about, and this is actually in the U Aspire sites. We have better information about kids' intentions. But let's say for just simplicity, we're Dallas. Of the 3,000, it's the 1,000 kids who have not specified, or the 500 kids who have not specified a plan for where to go and within that group. Yeah, John.
And so were these kind of subgroup findings consistent across districts? Were you repeatedly finding those places where kids hadn't specified which college or had, I don't know if you have data across districts?
This is very consistent across the 3 cities within U Aspire. Dallas, we don't have the same district, but the other subgroup findings that we try and do a fairly limited set of subgroup analyses given that the sample is fairly small. But for instance, we find that across the 4 sites, the texts are most effective for students in the middle of the academic distribution. And we think of these as students who have academic performance to be college ready. They're not so high, though, in the distribution that they are going to have gotten whatever limited advising resources were available in school, and but they're high enough to potentially go on to school. Eric.
I think you mentioned the average cost before. Did you calculate like the cost per student?
It's a great question. We haven't. I mean, I could work out the math, but we haven't done that. Per student induced to go. Yeah. I haven't worked that out yet, but we could do that.
Was the slide before the total sample?
This is the total sample within each of these sites. Yeah.
What was the number of messages the students were receiving?
10.
What's the number that made the difference at this point? So let's say 5 messages were not making any difference, but then 8 messages were making some difference.
I can speak to that a little bit. We don't really have a way of disentangling which messages are driving the overall impacts on enrollment. We see the most response for help and the most click through on the web links for messages related to financial tasks, so financial aid, tuition bills. So we also had the chance to do some surveying and actually text-based qualitative data collection with students. And we asked them to respond whether they felt each of these statements was true. Did they feel it was true that the messages got them to complete a task they hadn't yet done, informed them about something they hadn't realized they needed to do, help them manage their time, in the case of U Aspire, reach out to an advisor for help. And we certainly did not have perfect response rates, and so there is certainly some selection going on. But you could see nonetheless that the majority of students felt that the messages were operating through some of the channels that I outlined earlier, that they were helping them, they were informing them about tasks they didn't know, helping them stay on task, or helping connect them to assistance. To the issue of cost effectiveness, before I go into the details, one of the things I want to emphasize is that this should be viewed really as a back of the envelope cost comparison. These are different experiments, different sites, different samples. So they are not in any way a head-to-head comparison, but just want to give you a point of reference. So I started to mention earlier, our intervention cost $7 per student. That's inclusive of retaining school counselors to provide help if students want assistance. The messaging costs alone were $2 per student. This should say up to, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over an important result. We find no impact in Boston, Massachusetts, where there is a very high concentration of college information, college planning supports within schools, within the community, not only during the school year, but also during the summer. And so our interpretation of this pattern of results, both what I present here and throughout the paper, is that in places where students lack access to quality information, the access of assistance, that these text messages can be helpful, and quite helpful in giving them information they don't have, connecting them to help that they might not otherwise access. But in sites where there's already a strong concentration of college-going supports, the messages are going to make less of a difference. Yeah?
You probably said this, but how do you define college planning supports?
Not in a particularly systematic way, but you could think about school and community-based college and financial aid advising. And so we did, and we report on this some in the paper, but we tried to canvass the set of college advising informational resources available in each of the communities where we were working. Eric?
This is one part where, I mean, we can also say something like, places where the Red Sox are playing, there's, it's not going to be effective whatsoever.
Sure. And I didn't mean to say. I think that's right, and I don't mean to stand behind.
The Red Sox part is right.
Yeah, I don't mean to stand behind it as a definitive interpretation. This is the first text messaging. I guess what I'd say is I would view this as a pilot study where we're trying to get a sense of where this is effective. I think we're still learning.
I mean, you could probably break Boston up even further because you have this. USpire is a school-based program, and since it's school-based program,
yeah, that's a great point.
You could actually do the census at each of those schools as to how thick the college planning supports were at each of these schools, and then you could actually use that as a regressor if you really think it's somehow the mediating factor here, and regress at a school level basis the actual effect size you're getting versus the level of supports. If you're right on that it is this concentration, that might be sufficient. I mean, the other problem is you have so many colleges in Boston that it's not just the internal to the school.
But it's a great question, and I think I have not, partly because we're still in the middle of these analyses. Like with any pilot, the question you want to ask is how much of this is unique to these sites, to this instance. So this past summer we replicated this experiment. We actually did a multi-treatment experiment with 4 districts in the Austin area of Texas, these same 3 USpire sites in Baltimore, Massachusetts, and these results are still forthcoming, but we find again a consistent pattern of positive effects among populations or sites that have less access to college information. Interestingly, we also find that the magnitude of the enrollment increases are about the same for the text message outreach versus students who are randomly assigned to receive outreach from a counselor. The cost of implementing the text messaging is about 1/20th. So we're generating similar magnitude effects with this automated personalized approach as we are when we have counselors reach out personally. Those analyses are still really early going, but hopefully we'll have a working paper in the next couple months. Yeah?
One other possibility, I mean, a different way to think about your randomization is you really have kind of randomization at the school level. You have a series of different sites that are going on. And so exploring the heterogeneity and the treatment effect by sites, according to some measure like this. The other thing is, since you've got the clearinghouse records or the higher THECB records, you know historically what percentage of students are attending each of the schools. And so then you could actually even use those as characteristics as well. You see larger treatment effects for particular students intending to go to a particular school according to what the percentage was, because it could be that part of the reason you're not getting a lot of reinforcement here is because most of these students are going to Bunker Hill, and they're kind of going with the pack already, so to speak, or Bunker Hill has good outreach or something like that. And so trying to figure out that kind of social pattern, go back to your potential hypotheses and see if you can dissect some of those out.
Yeah, no, that's really useful. That's a great suggestion. Other questions? Okay, so on this cost effectiveness issue, again, I want to reinforce this is just a back of the envelope calculation. $7, this clearly should say up to 7 percentage points. That's a fix I need to make. Compare that with our prior counseling experiments where, as I described earlier, we had counselors proactively reach out to students and offer help. That was still fairly inexpensive, $150 per student, and increased enrollment by 5 to 8 percentage points. Eric and Bridget's H&R Block FAFSA work, at least the direct cost of the program was about $88 per student, generated an enrollment increase of about 8 percentage points. 2 things to point out about these studies as well as this more expensive mentoring program. Each of these 3 studies has demonstrated an impact not just on whether kids go to college, but whether they remain continuously enrolled. That's certainly true for H&R Block as well as our summer work and the mentoring work. And that, I think, with any college access program is really the $1 million question. Are we getting kids into college where they're positioned for success and they're going to stay? In which case, that over a lifetime, and for most students, it's probably going to be a good thing. I think we're going to be a lot more worried if we're inducing students to enroll only to have them drop out after a semester or 2, especially if they have to incur some debt. And so we certainly are going to follow the text message students. We're going to follow both these groups longitudinally to see whether there are impacts not just on the enrollment margin, but ideally on the persistence and success margin. One other point, just to make real quick, Sean. I didn't present these results for the counseling work, but as you see, there was about a 5 to 8 percentage point increase in enrollment. We find about double the magnitude impact on whether they remain continuously enrolled into fall of their sophomore year. Which again, I think reinforces this idea that these students are, struggling with these summer tasks is not really an indication of whether these students can succeed in college. I think it in fact reinforces the idea that this is a difficult bottleneck for students to get through without outside supports, and that helping them through the summer positions them to go to college and be successful. Sean?
So two questions on the cost. One is, do these costs represent what it would cost us to do it if it weren't you guys doing it? Like, is this your time to sit there and punch little buttons on the...
No, that's a great question.
Is this the scalable cost, or is this what the
Yeah, it's a great question, and a very fair one. I would say this is inclusive of most of the costs that Dallas ISD would have to incur to do this the next year. So they have to pay for text messaging, they have to pay for counselors to work, they have to pay for someone, a data person, to update the college information we had collected, or if it was a new site doing it, to collect that information in the first place. I actually think you don't need a button presser anymore, fortunately. With this better portal, it actually, I think, just increases the efficiency of counselor time. Certainly, I think you'd add some project management costs, but even if you bump this up, even if you double that, you're still at a pretty low cost intervention.
The other point is, I just think it's not fair to report cost per participant. You should report cost per participant induced to change, because $7 a person when only 7% change is $100 a person. Now, it's still, the comparison is still fair because all those should scale, but it's, when people go around and say, oh, this only costs $3 a person, and it only had 3% effect, it's really the cost per induced.
Sure, no, it's the same point. I think that's an important point, and we should adjust that. So, what's my time frame? Oh, I got about 20 minutes? Okay, so this was all kind of in the context of the summer after the summer after high school. But we might think that this kind of personalized messaging, the offer of help, might be just as important when students are in college. Low-income students, even conditional on academic achievement, persist at lower rates. They graduate, they earn college degrees by their mid-20s at lower rates than more affluent peers. And there might be behavior obstacles that contribute to these inequalities. Students, as I mentioned earlier, face a lot of complex information around course and major selection. They're spread pretty thin academically and socially. And so they may have a harder time staying focused on tasks they need to complete. They may question, even when they're on campus, whether they belong, whether students like them can be successful or are successful on that campus. And they continue to have limited access to professional guidance or support. In fact, the advising to student ratios are even lower in colleges than they are in high schools. And there's a particularly reason why we think focusing on FAFSA renewal might be important. So students who receive financial aid going into freshman year don't get that aid throughout, as a guarantee throughout their time in college. They have to renew their aid every year, which means completing the FAFSA, the same complicated form that Eric and Bridget focused on in their work, every year of college. While there's been considerable attention to the complexity of FAFSA during high school, both by researchers, by policymakers, by schools, there's much less attention on FAFSA renewal at the college level. Similar to the summer melt, it's not that colleges or the Department of Education is not sending out information about renewal, but it may be using ineffective channels to distribute that information. In some descriptive work that I'm doing with a graduate student, we find that this is drawing on the NIPSAS, 10 to 20% of freshman year Pell recipients in good academic standing, like a 3.0 GPA or higher, do not renew their aid. And this would seem to be the group that would be to benefit the most from ongoing grant assistance, since they're already doing well in college. Given the issue of students being spread thin academically and socially, you can imagine many college freshmen procrastinating on renewing their FAFSA to the point where they just don't do it at all, or they miss priority deadlines to qualify for additional aid. Eric?
One thing that would be nice to see on the boldface one is where in the distribution they're coming from. At least in the Ohio data, a lot
Which
of the
distribution?
The the distribution of Pell Grant awards.
Okay.
Like in the Ohio renewal data, what you see is that 10 to 20% is all at the minimum awards.
At the minimum awards.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so it'd be nice to know if it's more spread out.
The one thing we do observe, and this is, I don't think, surprising and will be consistent with the results I show you in a minute, failure to renew is much higher among community college students than four-year students. So given this importance of renewal but lack of attention to it, we designed another text messaging study where we sent students a handful of text message reminders of tasks just around FAFSA renewal and maintaining satisfactory academic progress. So the messages, this was again in partnership with UAspire. One of the messages invited students to a FAFSA renewal party with the idea that we wanted to provide students with a chance to connect with some of their friends and also to kind of destigmatize the idea of seeking out help because they could see other people they knew while also completing the FAFSA. Offered them individual help either from UAspire or through these free resources in the community. And once they completed the FAFSA, offered them help interpreting their financial aid award letter. As I mentioned, we did this in Boston with UAspire, which is Boston-based, so we had 733 college freshmen across lots of different colleges and universities. The summer before, these students had received either text-based or peer mentor outreach from students. All 733 had. So one possibility is that they're just primed to be in touch with UAspire. So this is going to impact our generalizability, not the internal validity of our analyses. Again, predominantly low-income students of color, about 3/4 enrolling at four-year institutions, a quarter at community colleges. Half of them are randomly assigned to get the text messages. And again, they're well-balanced on baseline characteristics. This is very preliminary work, and so I'll show you the results we've run so far, and I'd love your help interpreting them, because I think there are some interesting patterns. This shows you the probability of persisting into the sophomore year. You can see no overall effect. Most people persist in college. Slightly negative but not significant effect on persistence at four-year institutions, but a big percentage-wise increase in the probability that students persist at a two-year institution. So this, of course, raises the question of whether the effects might be different for people who are at community colleges or at four-year institutions their freshman year. And so we break that up here. And what you see is, again, overall, vast majority of students do persist, but that sending these text messages actually has a negative, marginally significant, but negative effect on whether students who start at four-year institutions persist into sophomore year. On the other hand, for students who start at a community college, it has a large positive impact on whether students persist, with almost all of that driven by persisting at a two-year institution. Please.
You said these students are scattered at different colleges?
That's right.
I mean, your sample's not large enough, there's no sort of college fixed effect or something that you can do. So there could be lots of other things going on simultaneously.
Oh yeah, definitely. This is the best we can do is within sector, and we're getting a little iffy there.
So is this where they intended to start before randomization, or is this where they actually started?
This is where they are during freshman year. So we observe whether you are enrolled at a four-year institution or a two-year institution prior to the point of randomization, and then we randomly assign you. We did do the random assignment within sector. Balance holds when we look with our within the sector analyses.
So this isn't the summer text. This is the later text.
This is
FAFSA party thing.
This is FAFSA parties. This is messages delivered to students during the spring of their freshman year in college. Okay.
Is this persistence at the same institution?
This is overall persistence. About half of this effect is persistence at the same institution.
Same sector?
No, the actual same. So if you start at Bunker Hill, you continued at Bunker Hill. And this is for two-year starters, the probability of persisting overall, but you can see that's driven entirely by persisting at a two-year institution, or mostly. So I'll tell you what we've thought of so far, and then really would love any additional insights. I think in the case of the 2 years that the messages are probably providing information about FAFSA renewal that students may not otherwise be getting. So Judy Scott Clayton has done great work on the kind of structurally challenging elements of community colleges for students who are enrolled there. Some of the challenges are students spend very little time on campus because they're commuting. The advising resources are stretched particularly thin, and they are often more bureaucratic environments. So students at community colleges may simply not be getting information about FAFSA renewal. And so there, our margin may be providing them information, prompts to renew the FAFSA that they're not getting elsewhere. The four-year results, the negative effects for four-year starters are driven by entirely by two groups. Students who are enrolled at less selective residential colleges outside of where they live, so outside of Boston, outside of Springfield. So one, it's probably much more costly for them to live on campus. Two, the effects are driven by students enrolled part-time. And so being at a costly, less selective residential college outside of your city, being enrolled part-time, we might think of all of those as characteristics of someone whose enrollment is somewhat tenuous. The question that we haven't been able to disentangle, so I'd love any insight on, is why would a few text messages induce potentially tenuously enrolled students to not continue versus students who didn't receive the messages? Yeah?
One possibility would be that it's actually causing these students to substitute away from using their school resources for this more familiar Aspire resource.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I would imagine that a lot of the less selective residential colleges might actually house better resources. I mean, in the two-year sector, the private 2 years are pros at getting people to get FAFSA and get as much government money as possible. And I would guess that especially at residential colleges, that might be the case, especially if they're private, where they're pros at getting government money.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas it's less of an issue for a lot of the community colleges. It's just less of their focus. So if the students are more tenuous, they might feel closer ties to Aspire than to the schools.
And why would that lead them to be less likely to persist? Oh, because they feel like they can talk about it openly, or
there might be better resources that are school specific, potentially, or there might be sort of more continuity, or they might say this is our internal deadline, or I don't know, a number of things that might actually work better for continuing students.
interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Back one slide.
Go back one slide?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I guess another thing that what you said made me thought about that I haven't earlier is that in some ways you Aspire, on the other side of this, you Aspire may have a more impartial perspective to offer to the students. That, you took out loans to go here in the first year, doesn't sound like you're so engaged, maybe it makes sense to take some time off. Whereas, I don't know that this is the case, but it's possible the institutions have, they may have different incentives to try and get students to stay. So substituting where students are going for information may lead to this enrollment rate. We're still waiting, by the way, for the interaction data from Aspire so we can look at this more. Yeah, please.
Well, I can also imagine a scenario where the students who are less engaged, like part-time, they get these text messages about more things they need to do, and it's really intimidating, and it really puts them off, and they're like, oh, well, I can't deal with all the financial aid stuff on top of trying to figure out my classes and what I want to do, like whether I want to persist next year and my general plans. So it could be triggering some sort of negative thoughts. And for students who aren't getting them, they may not be in a good financial situation. They continue to go on anyway, since they may not be doing whatever they need to do. But at least they don't have that the extra mental burden of thinking of more things to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point. And one of the limitations in this pilot is we don't observe whether people actually renew their FAFSA or not. But I think the hypothesis that the messages may be kind of, if for students who are potentially tenuous or on the margin anyways, that this could induce some kind of cognitive overload that leads them. That's very helpful. Thank you, Eric.
One thing part of it is I just don't understand the table altogether. I mean, like the 79% and the 4%. I mean, are they supposed to add up to get us close to the overall. I don't understand some of where this effect's coming, because, and that's one part that I just don't understand the number. The other statement I was going to make was on the overall, in the H&R Block stuff, for the sample of students who previously had been attending college actively, there's no impact whatsoever on enrollment patterns on the FAFSA help, for students who are already enrolled. And nobody's ever done the same thing of trying to kind of separate that out by initial starting sector. It'd be interesting to see that same pattern persist here, that there's really no impact at the 4-year starting students, but on the 2-year starting students, there was. It'd be worthwhile to kind of pull that out, because in some ways, it's not necessarily the same in the prompt, but it's the same phenomenon that's trying to be captured there.
Yeah, no, and on the issue of the numbers not summing, I have to look at.
Yeah.
I have to look at that. Okay, I just in the interest of time, so stepping out more broadly from the summer melt work, from the FAFSA renewal work, I think there's lots of places in students' trajectories, post-secondary trajectories, where these strategies of personalized information and the offer of assistance can be applied. And so earlier in high school, I think that we can use similar strategies to encourage students to make more informed college choices. We're doing some work now in Texas where we are trying to provide guidance using really rich student-level data in Texas, provide guidance to students who have started the FAFSA but not completed it, to make sure they know whether they need to still submit to provide a signature, whether they need to complete the verification process. So that's a nice example of a project where the outgoing messages to the students will be continually updated as we get more information as they progress through the FAFSA. Once students are in college, I think providing students with prompts to make use of academic and social support services once they're on campus. About to start some work on loan repayment. So to help students at community college make more informed decisions about the loan repayment plans that they choose, and helping them stay on track with their payments. I think what I'm most interested, though, I'm interested in the different trajectories, but how we can apply these strategies in other contexts. So all the work that I've done so far has been in urban contexts. I think there's lots of reasons why these approaches may be particularly important in rural contexts, where students are more geographically dispersed, where it may be that much harder to get to someone at a school, at a community center, but where cell phone penetration rates are still pretty high. So that's one area. I'm also really interested going forward in the social influences on students' decision making. So really trying to understand the relative effect of providing students with information versus also potentially providing their parents. And so I think one of the challenges there is that schools, I think, typically struggle to engage parents at large volumes. And so I'm really interested in ways that we might go through other organizations that engage large volumes of lower income parents. So whether that's a large employer, I think Eric and Bridget might be doing some work there. A large university, Sarah Turner and I at University of Virginia, are doing some work working through UVA HR to reach lower income parents to provide them information about college and financial aid for their children. UVA employs, probably like Stanford, tens of thousands of people, a fair number of whom are fairly low in the income distribution. So it provides a nice channel through which we can reach parents. As much as I think low-income, traditional age low-income students don't have access to counseling and information, that is even more of a problem for non-traditional students who typically lack advising, counseling resources to help them choose their educational options. So figuring out ways we can get better information for non-traditional students to evaluate post-secondary choices. And then figuring out ways to continue to build, to a conversation Sean and I had earlier, continue to build the capacity of school counselors or school-based staff to support students. So I think as a takeaway message, I see creative leverage of technology combined with the offer of individualized assistance in order to help students deal with more complex challenges, a real promising solution with a lot of potential for scale and application in other settings as a promising strategy to address some of these longstanding inequalities in college access and success. So here's my email, my faculty page if you want to read any of the papers that I talked about. I'd really be happy to kind of engage with any of you over email to talk about this work further, and I'm obviously happy to answer any questions. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.